Welcome General Sir Richard Barrons, former Standing Joint Forces Commander. Richard, good evening to you.
Hello.
So just now, we're waiting a briefing, I think it's taking place at the Pentagon at Arlington, Virginia, in near Washington now, on the collision between a Russian jet and that US drone over the Black Sea. Some news has come out of that, some videos been released. It seems the Russian jet was dumping jet fuel on the drone before it finally came down. What are your thoughts on that incident?
Yes, so the video is pretty clear that these Russian jets, Su-27s, had a couple of passes over maybe half an hour at this US Reaper drone, dumping fuel on it in the hope that it would blind the sensors, particularly the cameras that are on these aircraft. And indeed, in the last moments of the drone's existence, they seem to do that briefly.
Does this count for you as a significant escalation?
Well, it only doesn't because the drone is unmanned. If this had been an encounter between two manned aircraft, then essentially the Russian action would have downed a US aircrew as well as its aircraft. It's still an enormous provocation because this drone was in an international airspace, and the Russian pilots have not only blinded it, they've collided with it, and by damaging the propeller, they've caused it to crash. So I think people will want to keep it in proportion, but frankly, it's an outrageous act by the Russian Air Force.
And the US drone, as you say, was in international airspace. The Russian side are suggesting that they'd unilaterally imposed a no-fly zone, which is, again, on the edge of provocation, isn't it?
Yes, it is. I mean, the Russians know, and the Americans know, that the US intelligence architecture is providing support to Ukraine in the way that it perhaps helps to identify targeting or other relevant intelligence for the Ukrainian armed forces. So they're never going to agree on this. But the fact is, in law, well, at least the laws that we respect, this is international airspace, and you cannot unilaterally decide that you declare it a no-fly zone, and particularly not one that you haven't told anybody about.
Yeah, interesting that we're getting from the American military a briefing on this now, having the sort of conversation that you and I are having. The US are clearly keen to keep the high ground on this, the moral authority on an incident like this.
Well, yes, and they have the huge advantage that they have very clear video that shows these Russian aircraft dropping fuel on the drone, and then there is some sort of collision and the propeller is bent, and that will cause the thing to crash. So no doubt the Russians will deny it, but what's happened is absolutely clear, and it's not the first time that fuel will have been dumped over a drone.
Yeah, and now another news today, we have Poland sending, 4 fighter jets to Ukraine. These are Soviet-era MiGs, so capable of being taken and flown by Ukrainian pilots from day one. 4 jets only, but the hope will be this will be opening the door.
So the key point, as you've just stated it, is that these are jets that the Ukrainian Air Force already know how to fly. So this is an increase of supply. It's still significant, even though it's only 4 aircraft. But there really aren't very many more of these aircraft to hand over. So the request from President Zelensky that they would get US F-16s is a completely different, much longer term proposition.
Yes.
So it's great that Soviet-era model aircraft can be handed over to Ukraine, but it's a much easier thing to do than give them a completely new type of equipment.
Yes, I think it's been suggested that Britain, for example, could supply a country like Poland with modern jets as those MiGs are handed over, as a kind of a knock-on beneficial effect. That could unlock the door, if others follow suit or do that, could unlock the door to more jets heading for Ukraine.
Yes, indeed, and Poland has asked for this for some time, and it particularly would like to receive US F-16 jets, and the US has balked at that as at a level of escalation too far. And we need to remember that the key thing in the way the US and other countries calibrate the assistance to Ukraine is that they will do nothing that causes this to become a shooting war between Russia and NATO. And although we've been on a sliding scale of escalation for some time where more stuff is provided, people have stuck to that article of faith rigidly so far.
And meanwhile, Richard, the fighting goes on around Bakhmut, which is as we said before, not necessarily a hugely strategically important area, but the fighting is intense, and the Russians, we now see from the latest reports, are losing heavily in terms of their troops killed and wounded.
So you're absolutely right. Bakhmut is a place no one would have heard of, even a year ago, and it's strategically important not because of its geography, but because of the fight that's going on around Bakhmut and has gone on now since around August. And on the Russian side, we have seen them apply astonishing numbers of people. Sort of strategic levels of manpower have been fed into this fight, and in many cases wasted, killed and wounded in large numbers, partly because the Russians don't seem to have uncovered a better way of fighting, and mostly because they can't apply the artillery ammunition to it, because they, like the Ukrainians, are finding that in relatively short supply. So the reason Bakhmut matters is strategically we need to work out whether the Russian struggle to take the city has so depleted the Russian forces that even if they take Bakhmut, they're not really going to get much further. That seems to be the case right now. On the other hand, there are clear signs that this has been a really tough fight for Ukraine, and for the soldiers who've been fighting this, sometimes without relief, for 6 months or more in the line. Every day they've gone into the line, they've fought Russians, they've done well, but they are tired and they wonder when this will stop, because they know you can't win a war by being on the defensive. And so from the Ukrainian perspective, have they depleted the Russian capability sufficiently around Bakhmut for Ukraine to mount its own offensive, perhaps sometime soon, sometime this year at any rate, using forces that have been kept out of the fight, husbanded and trained? Or is this just going to dissolve into a stalemate, if not at Bakhmut, at the next little town down the road?
Yeah, we just watch with, horrified fascination, I suppose. So much at stake. Now, what about here? The announcement of the Chancellor yesterday on defence spending. Tell me your thoughts on that.
So the announcement on defence spending has done two things, and they're important. The one thing is it has provided £3 billion over 2 years to support the new submarine arrangement between the UK, Australia, and the US, which will mean that the UK submarine fleet gets bigger. And over time, I guess, instead of spending maybe £40 billion on submarines, maybe we're now going to spend £80 billion over many years. The second thing that new money has done is that it has provided about £2 billion to buy munitions to replace the ammunition that has been sent to Ukraine, and to restore the stocks of our own armed forces, particularly the army, and they are extremely depleted right now. Both of those things matter, but the sum of money does not compensate defence for the combined effect of inflation, the fall in the value of the pound, and the need to replace many of the other things that are currently worn out, partly because of giving stuff to Ukraine. And what this new money does not do is it does not mean that the cuts in the army are being reversed. The army is going to reduce from about 82,000 down to 72,000, and it's only a few more above that now. And it's not going to buy the army the new modern equipment to replace the vehicles that they were issued in the 1990s. So many of the big issues that relate to our defence have been pushed down the road, possibly to the other side of a general election, with the government talking about getting to 2.5% of GDP at some point in the future. And I think some of our allies, certainly in European NATO, are going to think that we are not now pulling our weight in the way that they have dramatically increased their defence spending, although the UK still does spend a lot of money on defence, and in some cases doesn't spend it well.
Okay, really, really good to get your thoughts. Thank you. That's General Sir Richard Barrons there in our briefing room today. Now, here's just a reminder, coming up in the final weekend of the Rugby Six Nations tournament this weekend. The Times has its unbeatable coverage, columns by rugby legends Lawrence Dallaglio, Sam Warburton and Stuart Barnes. If you're a digital subscriber, it's all included as part of that subscription. So make sure you visit the Times website or the app and you can just check it all out there. Now, Pino and Friends gets going in just a few minutes' time. I've got Rachel Sylvester and Isabel Hardman with me, so you don't want to miss that. We want to hear from you. Do send us your thoughts. Send me a text, 87222, start with the word Times, or a tweet, and use the hashtag Times Radio. Time now